Is this the most important offseason in the history of the Carolina Panthers? Think about it. It might be. Let's talk about it right here on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and yes, of course, Friday, your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for watching this show here on YouTube and listening wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, where on Fridays throughout the entirety of the off season, I'm right here answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions. All you got to do is either at me or DM me over on Twitter at Julian Council to get your weekly Friday mailbag questions in here on Locked On Panthers. Today's episode of Locked On Panthers is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started $200 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Is this the most important offseason in the history of the Carolina Panthers? Think about it. There is an argument to be made that this certainly is one of the most important, maybe not the most important. I cannot remember every single offseason the Panthers have had, as there was a time where I was very young and would not have been following what was going on. But thinking about it in recent memory, it's hard to find another offseason coming off of, yes, a 5-12 season, but a season where in the final 9 weeks, this team went 4-5. They went toe-to-toe against Kansas City, who may win their third straight Super Bowl, and against Philadelphia, who also is going to be in position to contend for a Super Bowl. Tampa Bay, the first time around. Those are three teams that are very good football teams that the Panthers were very close to beating. I'm not going to say they should have beaten Kansas City, but certainly Tampa the first time around, and Philly also, those felt like games the Panthers should have came out on top of on those Sundays this past fall. And now looking at how well Bryce Young played, and that he has now been anointed as the franchise here in Carolina. He will be their quarterback this upcoming season. And if he keeps doing what he's doing, he'll be the quarterback here for a very, very long time, which is what everybody was hoping would be the case going into the season back at the start of 2024, way back in August. Now looking at the fact that you have your quarterback in place, that's not a question this offseason. Certainly who's going to back him up, as Andy Dalton is a free agent. He may go elsewhere, and the Panthers may want to go younger as far as the backup for Bryce Young. Maybe they'll have Jack Plummer back there as well as a backup to Bryce. I think somebody with more experience would make a lot more sense. Having that in place, that really helps you going into the offseason. Of course, a couple years ago, when the Panthers had hired Frank Reich, they had the number 1 overall pick. They knew they were going to get a quarterback, and they let everybody know once they trade up to number 1 what their plans were going into free agency. You don't have to wait until March 10th like they did a couple of years ago. Right now, here as I talk to you on January 8th, they know who their quarterback is, and they can start thinking about their plans this offseason. There's no head coaching search. There's no general manager search. The focus this offseason is on team building, and has not been the case the last couple of years, which is why, to me, this feels like the most important offseason the Panthers have had in a long while. You go back to the offseason following that magical 2015 season, you still had Cam. You still had Luke. You still had TD. You had Greg. You had a lot of guys that you knew were coming back off of a 15-1 regular season. So was it like there was a ton that you needed to do to be a contender? Obviously, things did not work out. They were able to bounce back the year after that, and then it all fell apart. And this is where we are right now, with the hope off of the quarterback playing so well the last 9 games of the season that this could be the dawn of a new era for the Carolina Panthers, with Dan Morgan calling the shots at general manager, with Dave Canales as the head coach, Bryce Young as a quarterback, and of course, Brant Tillis there handling cap and contracts as the EVP of football operations. And David Tepper back in the shadows, not meddling like he was the last couple of years, not even meddling, but being an active participant, which has led to the Carolina Panthers having all those failures since he bought the team some couple of years ago. When you look at it, the fact that you have Bryce, that's great. But offensively, there are certain things that they have to figure out, like with the offensive line starting up front. Ickey Ekwonu was solid his rookie year, terrible his second year. This past year, I thought he had another solid season, but was it worth him getting the fifth-year option the Panthers are going to have to exercise by early May? Will they do that? Dan Morgan talked about that on Monday. We'll go over what he had to say momentarily, but there's a decision there at their left tackle. Ickey Ekwonu what to do. Taylor Moton has a $31 million cap hit. I do not believe Taylor Moton's going to play in Carolina this upcoming season on a $31 million cap hit, nor should he play on that level of a cap hit. Do they extend him? Do they restructure the deal for a fourth straight offseason? Understand, since Taylor Moton got a deal ahead of the 2021 season, he was on the franchise tag. The Panthers had until July 15th of that summer to extend him. They got it done before the deadline. Every offseason following that deal being signed, the Panthers have restructured his deal. Now that Samir Suleiman's gone, that Brant Tillis is in, will the restructure stop? Or will they find a way to extend him? We'll find out what they're going to do there, but he was solid once again, giving up only one sack on the season. In the interior, you got Damian Lewis coming back. You have Robert Hunt coming back. Will they both play their positions? I assume that Hunt will be a right guard, but Damian Lewis, he's played center in the past. Can he potentially slide into center? Will Cade Mays, who started there the last couple of weeks of the season, will he maintain that job as the Panthers can spend only $3 million potentially on him when looking at the restricted free agency tender that he can be given at a point in time this offseason? Austin Corbett says he wants to be back, but he's not been given any assurances that will be happening. Brady Christensen as well. Where does he fit into the mix here in Carolina? Is he a cheaper, a younger replacement to Taylor Moton? There's those questions on the offensive line. Looking at running back, Chuba Hubbard, he's coming back, going to be the top back. Jonathan Brooks is likely going to miss the majority, if not all, of the 2025 season. So what does that mean for Miles Sanders? Does he come back, and is he the number 2 running back next season, or is he $8 million cap hit for a player who has not lived up to the contract he was signed a couple years ago? Is that worth the Panthers doing that, even though they know that their future at the position in Jonathan Brooks is not going to be available in all likelihood for the majority of the season, if not all of it? So do they draft the running back? Questions that they have to figure out. At wide receiver, Adam Thielen told us on Monday he's contemplating retirement. This apparently is not a new thing. He thought about it last year. He thought about the year prior, his final year in Minnesota, whether he was going to come back, keep playing football. And obviously where he's at, the location is important, and he seems to like what's being built here in Carolina. It's not what he signed up for 2 years ago when he came with Frank Reich to be one of the top receivers on this team, ending up being the de facto number 1 that season, and then the number 1 again this season as Deontay Johnson was traded midway through the year. And obviously things have not worked out for him since leaving Carolina. But if Thielen goes, what do you do at receiver? Xavier Legette has not shown me anything to believe that he's ever going to be a number 1 receiver here in Carolina. And understand that it's early, but I'm not a big believer in him from the beginning. I still think he can be a solid receiver for the Panthers. I just don't see a day where he's going to be a number 1. Jalen Coker was a pleasant surprise, the undrafted free agent out of Holy Cross, who quite frankly had a better season than Legette. Now, expectations for Coker certainly were not at the level that they were for Xavier Legette, which they shouldn't be. One guy was drafted in the first round. Another guy wasn't drafted at all, even if he was a priority undrafted free agent. Those two aren't going to be enough. And even if Thielen comes back, those 3 aren't enough. The Panthers need to find a bona fide number 1. They should be in the T. Higgins sweepstakes. They need to find another receiver as well. And hell, find a third. Push these young guys. Make them earn their spots in the NFL. Don't just give it to them. And that's what they've done with Legette. Last year we saw Mingo. Frank Reich just gave it to him, and it did not work out. Now, was he ever a player that was going to be capable? I don't believe so. Legette was always going to be capable, but he had to earn his spot, which is the right way to go about it. Tight end, plenty of questions there. JT Sanders clearly is the future at the position. They have finally found a replacement to Greg Olsen, which they've been looking for years now. Tommy Tremble, think it's worth coming back for him, but will he come back? We'll find out. Ian Thomas, I do think this is finally the end of an era for the survivor, Ian Thomas, here in Carolina. Then defensively, they've got a lot of work to do, to say it mildly, as this was the worst defense in the history of the franchise, and scoring defense-wise was the worst defense in the history of the National Football League. They do have a foundation, which is nice, that they have Derek Brown, who's one of the highest paid defensive tackles in football, and of course missed 16 games this season. They have Jaycee Horn, who proved this season that he can in fact be someone you can rely on. He may not play every game, as he missed the final two, but he's going to be one of the top corners in the NFL moving forward, as long as he can stay healthy like he did this past year. So you have those two. You also look at linebacker. I feel like they should probably be set as far as their starters are next year. Josey Jewell, looking at his deal, there's not much incentive to cut him. They don't save a ton of money. And I do think he fits the scheme that Ejiro Evero has. He's coming back as his third season as a DC in Carolina, and that he is a veteran presence that they need. Trevin Wallace, certainly he impressed when he was out there taking over for Shaq Thompson in the middle of that Panthers defense at the linebacker spot, wearing the green dot at points in times this season. So you're good there. As far as the starters go, of course, going to need to bring in some depth, but that's one area that you're not super concerned about heading into the offseason. It's everywhere else on the defense, in particular, the secondary. Jaycee, he's going to be back. Likely going to get an extension. Dan Morgan talked about that on Monday. Again, we'll go over that here momentarily. Do they stick with Shaw Smith-Wade, the fifth-round pick out of Washington State, at that nickel spot? He earned it late on in the season, then went on IR, missed the last couple games of the year. I can't imagine that Dan Jackson, someone that Dan Morgan was out there banging the table for when he was in Buffalo, I cannot imagine he's going to come back, as he was benched, was injured, and just never worked out the way that they hoped it would work out here in Carolina for him, as he had an opportunity to finally be a full-time starter in the NFL. It just is not who he's going to be, it looks like. Damani Richardson, another one of those UDFAs like Jalen Coker, who came in, surprised, and was able to earn a starting spot. Does he keep one of those starting safety spots moving forward? As you look at the safety position, Xavier Woods, free agent. Nick Scott, free agent. Jordan Fuller, free agent. I would imagine that probably all three of those guys are going to be gone. So do the Panthers spend a premium on a safety this offseason? Do they spend a premium not just on Jaycee Horn, but also on another cornerback this upcoming offseason in free agency, or maybe in the draft? Do they go out there and find someone who can come out and start immediately? What do they do with Mike Jackson? Plenty of questions there in the secondary. And of course, edge rusher, an area that was always going to be the weakness on this roster. And you can wonder what would they have been had DJ Wonnum been healthy the entire season, looking at the 4 sacks that he had, the amount of pressures that he had in 8 games played. It's certainly possible, had he been healthy, he would have lived up to the sack total 8 that he had last year in Minnesota, and would have been well worth, maybe even a bargain for what the Carolina Panthers got him for last March. We'll see if he will come back. I imagine he will. They could save $6.6 million if they wanted to by cutting him. Jadeveon Clowney has a $14 million cap hit. He was okay, 5.5 sacks this year, not a ton of pressures, was solid, I guess, against the run, even though this defense was not great against the run at all. But certainly, I think would have been better there than Brian Burns would have been this past year in Carolina, considering all of the circumstances around the defensive line injuries, the edge rusher injuries, and just the overall talent level that this defense had in 2024. Does he come back? He talked about even last year when he signed this deal that he looks at every contract as a 1-year contract. The team can tear it up and say, you're gone. The player can want to tear it up and ask for a new deal. So we'll see. He's back home. Obviously, that's going to be somewhat important to him. Sounds like he has a home in Houston. Also, we'll see what happens, but they do need to massively upgrade that position. I do not look at Clowney as that person who's going to be an alpha in that room as far as on the field making the kind of splash plays he has really never made in the NFL. Wonnum, that is a guy you could absolutely, I think, build around moving forward, but you need to add some other guys that are also better than what he has been so far for you in Carolina and in the NFL. And then looking at it, defensive line, you get Derek Brown back. That will help. Shai Tuttle, must go, was terrible these last 2 years for the Panthers on terrible run defenses. A'Shawn Robinson was the best in what was a horrible group this year. I do think he was good enough to earn a spot back next year, but they seriously need to find a true nose tackle in this scheme. They're going to run a 3-4, find that true nose. It was not Shy Tuttle. Derek Brown can be like A'Shawn Robinson, and we saw with Todd Wash. He wanted to turn Derek Brown into a pass rusher. A'Shawn Robinson had 7 sacks entering the season. He now has 12 and a half, had 5.5 sacks this year, tied for the team lead. He was really good in that spot for this team. So I would love to see him back. And with Derek Brown and then bring in a true nose, then the Panthers can figure some things out defensive line wise. And I would think too that the draft would be the area they would want to do that at. That would be a lot cheaper than free agency, considering the amount of money they're paying Derek Brown and also the cap hit that A'Shawn Robinson brings. So plenty of things the Panthers have to evaluate across the board this year. And I didn't even mention all 3 specialists, Eddie Pinheiro, Johnny Hecker, and of course, JJ Jansen. All 3 of them are free agents this season. So we'll see what's going to happen with all of them. So this is a very important offseason, and maybe the most important offseason in the history of the Carolina Panthers, as they have their quarterback. They look like they have their coach, have their GM. Can they build a winner around Bryce Young and be right there in contention? How far away are the Panthers? Well, we'll talk about that a little bit later on the show here on Locked On Panthers. Dan Morgan spoke to the media on Monday, and he gave an update to why they retained Ejiro Evero, why he believes in him, the stability of this offseason, evaluating the rookie class, and the extension potential for Jaycee Horn, and whether he's going to exercise that 5th-year option for Ickey Ekwonu. We'll talk about that here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. And looking at the NFL playoffs, the Detroit Lions, America's team, they truly are. I am rooting for them. You listen to me on Locked On NFL with Tony Wiggins over there in the barbershop. I have been rooting for the Lions all year long. Would love to see them win the Super Bowl. And now that they're 15-2, they have the number 1 seed. They are the top odds to win the Super Bowl, and that's where my money is going to be on this upcoming playoff season. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Back here on Locked On Panthers, Panthers general manager and president of football operations, might I add, cannot get that title wrong for Dan Morgan. He has earned it, the hallway promotion, just over a year ago, as he was on the staff for Scott Fitterer, one of his good buddies dating back to their time in Seattle. He has now taken over, and I think so far he's done a pretty good job. And next week, I do think I have it scheduled to talk about the first year as a general manager here in Carolina for Dan Morgan. I'm also going to give some grades for Dave Canales' year 1, and then I'll begin my offseason preview, starting off, of course, with the quarterback position, where we already know Bryce Young will be the quarterback. Talk about what the Panthers need to do at quarterback, aside from helping Bryce Young heading into this 2025 offseason. But looking at some things with the 2025 offseason, and really, namely, the first thing that came out, the big news of the day on Monday, was that Ejiro Evero, the defensive coordinator in Carolina, will be sticking around. Why? Well, because Dave Canales loves this game, and he's sticking by his man, and he understands, look at the players that he had to deal with this season. We got to get better players. We can make this scheme work, and he's believing in that. And so is Dan Morgan, who said, quote, I have to do my part as well, me and my staff, of putting really good players on the field, adding really good pieces to the defense. The young guys are developing on the defensive side of the ball. There's some young guys that we're excited about there, just some cornerstone guys on defense that we're excited to get back with Derek Brown and Jaycee. Evero's scheme is really good. We're excited to have him back. We just got to add pieces, keep developing the players that we have. Things can turn around. We just have to put in the work, and we're going to do that. So he understands that, the Dane Jackson thing that he wanted to happen didn't work out. And the Nick Scott signings, Jordan Fuller signings, that I imagine were closely tied to Ejiro as a DC, having worked with those guys back in LA, didn't work out. I do think that Dan will probably be far more influential in terms of who they bring in this offseason on the defensive side of the ball, more so than Ejiro Evero, because it is clear that when Ejiro Evero is evaluating the talent that he wants on his defense, he's not doing a great job of that. I think Josie Jewell and Ashawn Robinson, those guys were obviously good in this defense, guys you have previous relationships with, but looking at the guys, at least in the secondary, and this is supposed to be a scheme that really can show how great and it can accentuate a player in secondary skills. The only guys that were doing that were Mike Jackson, who Dan Morgan traded for and knew from back in Seattle. Same thing with really probably Dave Canales had a relationship with him back in Seattle, but that's a Seattle connection. You also look at what they brought in. God, I lost my train of thought there who I was thinking about, but that's one of the situations where that's not an Ejiro Evero. But you look at DJ Johnson, Ejiro wanted him. He's not good. You look, of course, Nick Scott, Jordan Fuller, those guys not work out. I do think that Dan Morgan probably is going to be the guy who has far more of a say of who's going to be on this defense next year as far as the guys are going to sign and draft than Ejiro Evero is going to be as they decide to keep him around and have him coach up a scheme that they think is really good. So we'll see if that will be the case in 2025. Stability. That is something the Panthers have this offseason, something they have not had in a very, very long time. Like last year, it was a coaching search that led to Dave Canales, of course, general manager search as well. The year prior to that, it was the search for Frank Reich. Prior to that, I think they still had Matt Rule, but there was talk of the rock star OC they had to hire, and that led to Ben McAdoo, who very much so was not a rock star OC. So that has not led to very many stable situations here in Carolina recently because, well, David Tepper has not been patient, and he didn't need to be patient as far as things go. And he's also clearly letting Dan and letting Dave make the decisions here in Carolina. Do you think if David Tepper was still acting up that Ejiro Evero would be around? Probably not. So maybe that's a good reason to be happy about Ejiro Evero sticking around here in Carolina, that the owner who forced him to stay in the first place, and you can blame David Tepper. If you don't want Ejiro Evero to be here, David Tepper is the reason why he's still here, because he could have gone to Green Bay. He could have gone to L.A., could have potentially gone to the Giants, taken those D.C. jobs. So Tepper would not let him go. And of course, it always goes back to David Tepper. Every single bad thing that happens here in Carolina is on him. And I still have hope that Ejiro Evero can work out. I do think that he can be a good DC. He has been in the past. We'll just see what they can do. So there's stability. And Dan talked about how they can just dig in on free agency, the draft, and on roster building and not worry about what the coaching staff's going to look like and what his staff's going to look like. They can work on building this roster, and that is a great thing, which again is why this is a very important offseason for Carolina, maybe the most important offseason in the history of the franchise. Evaluating the rookie class, Mike Kay asked him about this. He said, quote, "I think they were making strides." Mentioned Xavier Legette, what he did this year, Trevin Wallace, Shaw Smith-Wade, JT Sanders. It was all those guys had injuries at some point in time, had to miss some time, but you saw flashes from Legette. We didn't get to see that big play aside from the catch and run in week 3 on the road against Vegas. We didn't see the deep ball. We wanted to see it. I know Bryce missed some plenty of times, even when Bryce starting to play better. He missed some of those throws down the field. So we'll see if that happens next year. Trevin Wallace, I think that guy can be pretty solid. Shaw Smith-Wade, like to see more out of him, but he sound tackler, got an interception this year as well. JT Sanders was my favorite pick of the draft, and I am still feeling pretty good about him. Just getting more involved next year. Dan also saying, I think they had a solid rookie season. The defense, obviously got to fix it. And Dan Morgan, haven't been a Pro Bowler, haven't played for this organization, and wanting to bring the pride back to the Carolinas and knowing what it looks like here in Charlotte, even though it was a very different Charlotte back in 2003 when he went out there and helped his team get to the Super Bowl, where he had 20 tackles. Never forget that, against the Patriots in Super Bowl 38. Very different town, but still a town where if this team is winning, whether you're from Buffalo or Ohio or wherever the hell else, these people will get behind this team and this city will be on fire. And I would love to see it because I was not here in 2015. I was living up in Connecticut, working at ESPN at the time. It's been a long time since I've seen my hometown fired up about this team. So I would love to see that happen in the near future with Dan at the helm. And they got to fix the defense to do that. And he was asked by Scott Fowler, the Charlotte Observer, who's been around for every single Panther season, just about how that hurt him. And he said, obviously, it makes it tough. Ultimately, it lies on my shoulders to bring players in here to help EJ and his staff out. We're going to continue to add to the defensive side of the ball. We'll be aggressive. We'll be smart, but we'll be aggressive. And we saw last year, they spent $100 million on Robert Hunt in the morning, and then turn around, well, I guess in the afternoon, and turn around that evening and spent $69 million on Damian Lewis. They will be aggressive. We have already seen them when they knew we got to fix the O-line. They spent the money on the offensive line to go out there and fix it. And he knows they got to fix the defense. And he's played defensively at a high level in the NFL. So he knows what it looks like. He was in Seattle. They had some pretty doggone good defenses there under Pete Carroll. No, he was in Buffalo. Sean McDermott, great defense here in Carolina, has had some pretty good defenses in Buffalo. He knows what it looks like. So if he believes the DC scheme is good and he believes in the DC and he knows they got to get better players, I think maybe that's a guy worth trusting. So let's see what Dan Morgan can do this offseason when it comes to the defense. And Jaycee Horn, going to be a big part of this team moving forward. He is extension eligible. I would imagine that should be like the first bit of business. They've already given some guys some future contracts like Jordan Matthews, some other players who didn't really play big roles, which is of course important. But as far as like that first like big marquee thing, is that somebody asking me something earlier on Twitter in my DMs at Julian Council about what the Panthers are going to do like in April? It's like, dude, they got to go over their current roster and figure out who they want to keep around. They got to figure out whether they're going to extend Jaycee. They got to figure out free agency. Like there's so many other things that are going to happen before we really focus on like what's going to happen at the end of April. And Dan all but said that on Monday when talking to the media. And he said, quote about Jaycee and the extension, Jaycee is obviously the focal point of the defense, somebody that we're going to want here long-term, and we're going to work on getting him a long-term deal. So I think Jaycee Horn, before free agency even begins, he's going to sign an extension in Carolina. And then finally, one of the other things I want to touch on and what Dan we're going to talk about on Monday is fifth-year option for Ickey Ekwonu. That's coming up. I right now would not think that that's something Carolina necessarily should do. I can look into it deeper, but it sounds like that's something that Carolina is going to do because Dan Morgan said this, quote, I think Ickey fits right in there. We think a lot of Ickey. I think he's got better every single year. I think he made strides this season. I think Joe Gilbert and his staff have done a really good job with the O-line in general. I see Ickey as a piece that we want around here for a long time. So he wants to work on a long-term deal for Jaycee Horn, and he sees Ickey Ekwonu as a piece that he wants around here for a long time, which tells you the fifth-year option, which I don't know what the monetary value is right now recording this, that will be given to Ickey Ekwonu, and we'll see what they want to do in the future. Because if they give him the fifth-year option, he plays well next year in his fourth year, then he's probably looking at a big-time extension next offseason. So we'll see how it all plays out. That's what Dan Morgan had to say on Monday as he prepares for a very important offseason and one where he can focus in on team building and not who's going to be the DC, who's going to be the head coach, or any of those other not frivolous or trivial things, but things the Panthers have been focusing on the last couple of years here in Charlotte. How far away are they from contending? I'll tell you here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. It's playoff time, and if you're like me, you want to make the most of these final weeks of the football action. That's where Prize Picks comes in. If you love football and want a chance to win real money while watching the games, Prize Picks is the place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With Prize Picks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns, and for a shot to win up 1,000 times your money, you can make your picks in less than 60 seconds. And whether you're looking for a flex play or to boost your payout or want to cash out quickly, Prize Picks has got you covered. And with over 10 million members and billions in winnings, it's clear that people are loving this platform. Here's a special offer for Locked On Panthers listeners like you. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's Prize Picks. Run your game. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? That definitely happened to me. Unfortunately, I had a few subscriptions that I didn't even realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit. hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon, rocketmoney.com/lockedon. How far away are the Panthers from contending? That's a question that everybody is going to be asking themselves. And really, it's a question I don't think anyone was going to be asking if Bryce Young, of course, did not turn things around. And really, when you look at a week and a half ago, when they got blown out on the road in Tampa, did you think they're going to turn back around and put up 44 in Atlanta and win in the fashion that they did, and Bryce have 5 touchdowns and feel as good as you feel right now heading into the offseason about your quarterback and about the direction of your team? Probably not. So winning games does a lot for you. And I know we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, that maybe the best thing for the Panthers, even in a draft, does not have a surefire quarterback prospect. And yeah, you may love Cam Ward. You may love Shedeur Sanders. There's going to be plenty of reporting. And this is part of the reason about the draft that I just don't love, is when they just want to go out here and knock on these guys who we loved in college constantly for 4 straight months, which is just exhausting, but that's what the NFL does. It's not a surefire that those guys are going to come in and that teams are just all going to have first-round grade on them. I'm hearing like Shedeur Sanders doesn't have it. Some teams love Cam Ward, some don't. Well, here's the thing. Only one team right now, and that is not the Jacksonville Jaguars, who has the number 1 pick, the Tennessee Titans. Only one team's going to have a chance to take either one of those guys. And then we'll see moving forward what happens in the rest of the draft as far as what teams want to do. So I had talked about, for Carolina, maybe the best case scenario for the team was to be in a position where they were up there in the top 2, to where they could find their sucker and be able to get a number of draft picks to help build this team. And that's why up in New England, a lot of folks are mad, as they have their quarterback in Charlotte's own Drake May, and that they could have used those assets to help build the team. But instead, they're drafting 4th overall, and you deserve it, Boston. So that was an argument, even though I came out and said, after that all being said, that what I'd like to see is the Panthers win out. What I'd like to see is for them to build momentum into 2025. And now you're seeing why I wanted to see them win some games, because here they are. They went 5-12. They didn't triple their win total. They were close, but they didn't do it. But they look a lot better coached today than they looked in the first half of the season. They certainly have looked in the last couple of years under Frank Reich and his 11 games. And of course, those seasons under Matt Rule a couple of years ago. So that leads you to think maybe they're not that far away. And it's all about, where do you live? What kind of neighborhood are you in? And in this neighborhood, the NFC South, yeah, it's not that hard to kind of get back in there and find yourself some nice, pretty real estate and be atop of the division. Like Tampa's won it 4 years in a row. They had Tom Brady a couple of those years. They had Baker Mayfield the last couple. They've been solid, and they're probably not going anywhere as Baker. He's going to be there for, it seems like, a number of years. Todd Bowles has been able to turn things around as he finally has a quarterback. Didn't have a quarterback when he was up there with the Jets over a decade ago, and they look like a solid team moving forward. Maybe it hasn't been a decade for Bowles, but whatever. You understand what I'm saying. Didn't have a quarterback there. New York has a quarterback now, and Jason Licht, their general manager, has been there for a while, been a Super Bowl winner. So that's going to be a team they contend with, but they don't look like something that you can't overcome. This isn't an AFC West situation where, look at the Raiders. They just fired Antonio Pierce. They keep firing coaches every single year, and they don't have a quarterback. And even when they get one, is he going to be good enough to take down Mahomes? Jim Harbaugh is there in LA with the Chargers. I'm not sure Jim Harbaugh ever wins the division. He probably will find a way. The Chiefs will have a down year. He would have thought this year was going to be a down year, but they still found a way to win every freaking game except for one that they wanted to win. There will be a year where Jim Harbaugh can get it done because you got Justin Herbert. I think they'll figure it out. And we were talking about Bryce the other day as far as how good he's played, or how well he's played, rather, since coming back into the lineup. The quarterback who had a better passing grade is Justin Herbert. So LA will be there eventually, but the rest of the division, Bo Nix, great for him, but Denver's not going to get there. The Raiders are screwed. You don't have that situation. You don't have to worry about Patrick Mahomes. You don't even have, to a lesser extent, the AFC East, where Buffalo is dominating. You don't have to worry about Josh Allen. The best quarterback in the division right now is Baker Mayfield, who I like, but come on. So some smart moves can get them right there in contention. I'm not going to say this upcoming season. There's a lot that needs to happen. Like, they got to figure out, as I mentioned, about the offensive line, who they're going to keep around, how they're going to figure out the cap situation, receiver. They got to add more talent there, some depth there at running back, tight end. That has been a terrible position here for years on end. They got to upgrade that talent level around JT Sanders. Defensively, there's a lot of work. I do not believe, but here's the thing about the NFL. Like, every year you see 4 new teams in the playoffs, and in this division, looking at where they were this past year, they could have been a 7-10 team. Now, they shouldn't have been, because terrible defense. They were right exactly where they should have been at 5-12, but they were very close to being a 7-10 team. And if you can improve the defense and you can find the number 1 receiver and do a couple other things, why can't you be actually that 7-win team next year? And maybe even better, that 8-win team, and be just right there on the doorstep, knocking at being in the playoffs. And the next year, well, I would think there'd be a lot of expectations, especially if Bryce continues to play the way he's played and Dan Morgan can build the roster the way he wants to, and Dave Canales continues to grow in this role and show kind of what he's shown in the last 9 weeks. So obviously they're not there yet. There's a lot to go down here in Carolina, but they're not as far away as, well, we would have thought back through 8 weeks at 1-7. They're getting closer, but certainly got to get things right this time around, which again is why this is a very important and maybe the most important offseason in the history of the Carolina Panthers franchise. That's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all, subscribe or follow the show for free over on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, because on Friday I'm going to be back for the first time of this offseason, answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions. All you got to do is either at me or DM me to get those questions into me right now. But in the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole. As always, keep pounding. And on tomorrow's show, I've been doing it the last couple off seasons. I'm going to do it this offseason again. My offseason to-do list for the Carolina Panthers. Get all that action here tomorrow on Locked On Panthers.